Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Sermon. I'm Matt Hotho, the Director of Production and Online Engagement, and I'm here with...
Sally Campbell-Evans, the Pastor for Congregational Care.
Awesome. So Sally, you just preached a sermon that had to do a lot of things. It kicked off our series, Consequences of the Cross. It had to unpack this really gnarly idea for our community anyways of substitutionary atonement, and then reimagine it in a non-violent way. So I feel like I just kind of recapped your sermon. And if anybody wants to hear it, please go back and listen to it and then come join us for this discussion, because in this discussion, I want to go into a little bit about what shaped you in your understanding of nonviolence, and especially nonviolence as it relates to the person of Jesus. So let's talk about your own experiences with nonviolence, and you can start us any number of places on this table.
Sure. Ever since I was a young child, I wanted to be a missionary. And finally, when I got to be old enough, I went to Zaire. If you're old enough, you remember that is
used to be Congo.
It is now the Democratic Republic of Congo, and it used to be Zaire. So that says how long ago it was.
Okay.
So I was there in 1981 for almost 4 months working in a public health clinic, and it was opened my eyes to the world and poverty. And I just came back thinking everybody needs to travel and see the world. Then in 1983, I spent 6 weeks in South Africa as part of a young adult delegation to build relationships, peaceful relationships across the races of white, black, colored, Indian, with North Americans and South Africans. And that was an incredible experience. Mm-hmm. And after that, I had some other, I worked with the homeless in Atlanta, and I did my first nonviolent protest around the death penalty.
Okay.
And then I ended up in Nicaragua for a year during the Contra War in the 80s. So I was there 86 and 87. But the very first time I visited Nicaragua was in 1985 as a Witness for Peace, which was an organization that literally, kind of like I talked about in the sermon, nonviolent direct action, where you literally put your body in a situation where you say, this is not okay with me. My parents weren't always happy about that decision, but
we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that, how that has come back around now that you're a parent.
Yes.
Yeah. So this idea of nonviolence being associated with our bodies, in the sense of one way that we can practice nonviolence is by being in the way. Is that kind of how you would describe it? Kind of going and putting your body in between someone who is an aggressor and someone who's a victim? Is that kind of what you were doing?
Yeah. Sometimes it's just making a statement. Yes, it is in the way. It's putting your body there. Sometimes it's just to make someone aware of something. But then in some more dramatic ways, it is physically putting yourself in between a conflict situation.
Okay.
Yes.
So you've got your journals out here from your time in Nicaragua. Walk us through kind of a story or something that you remember from that time.
Yeah. I'll just say this sermon was a hard one for me in the sense of trying to do all those things that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Substitutionary atonement, blood sacrifice, all this, and reimagining it to this way of nonviolence. And so it brought up a lot of things for me in my past, because now I'm the pastor for congregational care, and I spend a lot of time at people's bedsides in the hospital. And when we finish this, I'm headed to the hospital to see someone. And that's such important work. That is a way of nonviolent care, offering a non-anxious presence. But in my earlier years, I did a lot more of this. And so in 1985 was the first time I went to Nicaragua, and it was during the Sandinista Contra War. And at that time, we felt really positive about what was happening in that revolution, that people were learning to read, and there was food, and people were caring about one another. But in the whole geopolitical scheme of things, that little tiny country suffered a lot because of other countries getting involved, ours being one of them. The bottom line is in March of 87, the first North American, when I was living there. So I went there in 85 for a visit, and I lived there 86 and 87. So in March of 87, the first North American was killed by the Contras.
Okay.
His name was Ben Lindner, and he and two of his coworkers had been trying to work in a very remote community, San Jose de Bocay, I believe, to put in an electricity for water and lights in that community. He was 28 years old. He'd been there for nearly 3 years, and we got word that he'd been murdered. And so that was the first. So we thought maybe this would raise awareness in the United States that this little country, which is really teeny, like the size of New Hampshire, I believe, it's maybe it's going to end the war.
Okay.
It didn't, it didn't. But anyway, a bunch of North Americans decided to do a walk to the place where Ben was killed. And
Ben was killed by who?
The Contras.
Okay.
The counter-revolutionary forces.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I stumbled upon in my sermon, preparing for this sermon, I pulled out all my journals and I wasted a lot of time. I mean, I enjoyed it, but I spent a lot of time doing it.
Yes.
But I did come across something, and it said, it was Mother's Day of 1987. We are still making plans and considering options on how best to respond to Ben's assassination as U.S. citizens and respond as Christians. We are planning a walk for life, a walk against terror, a walk for light. We're going to go to El Qua and El Cedro and San Jose de Bocay, the place where Ben was assassinated, along with his two co-workers, Sergio Fernandez and Pablo Rosales. I must confess that I have more than a little fear, and yet I feel compelled to go. As a political statement, as an education, and as a pastoral visit, especially to the families of those who were killed by the Contras. Well, I did go. It was a couple of weeks later before all the details got worked out. And further in my notes say, and don't tell mom and dad, and don't tell later on, but I want to tell mom and dad.
Yeah.
I wanted to tell them what was going on. I did. Eventually they came to visit and had their hearts opened as well. But anyway, that was a powerful walk. I came across pictures of it. That's me in 1987. They can cut the flowers, but they can't stop the spring, is what our banner said. But people, like children and women and men, would just come out and walk with us. They were so happy that we were there to witness what it was like to live in the countryside in this height of the war.
And so Ben and his friends, they were trying to provide resources for these more rural communities, basically, so they could have some equity in this whole country. Yeah. And the people who killed him didn't want the rural people to have this access.
Right.
Yeah. So sometimes it seems like nonviolence is necessary when the most vulnerable are being oppressed.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to make a make a statement on their behalf. I mean, I think again what Grace said on his sermon the other night, Ash Wednesday, it's the vertical relationship and horizontal. It's our relationship with God, but it's our relationship with our community.
Yeah.
And together, we got to do them both together.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's jump to talking about how you have instilled this idea of nonviolence in your own children. And what that's kind of like for you. I mean, I think our viewers, I would be surprised if there's a ton of viewers who have been on the same journey that you've been on. But I think there are viewers who, in their heart of hearts, want to instill these values in their children, or maybe hope that they've instilled these values in their children. So what's that look like for you?
Well, I have 3 young adult children. They're all in their 30, and 33. We just had a birthday. I asked them what was some of their earliest memories of nonviolent direct action, and they all remember, I believe it was 2001, we went to protest the invasion of Iraq, and we were standing in the highway on US 1 in Miami where we were living, and they all remember people honking and cheering with us or honking boos. They remember being
given the one finger salute.
Yeah, they were. Yeah. The boys were 7 and Ab was 9. So yeah. And then Ben, during college, got a lot of students from North Carolina to go to New York to be in a protest in support of amending climate change and making
Yeah.
it, and he did it with his guitar and singing peaceful ways and getting, like the Pied Piper, more people involved and caring for the environment. He's lived his life doing that in so many ways.
Which is a
And
rich American tradition, by the way, of
oh yeah,
nonviolent protest through song.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. This land is your land.
Yeah.
And all, yeah. And then Zach has led the way with us on Black Lives Matters as a family, has encouraged us, and so all of them in their different ways. Sometimes putting themselves in situations that I, as a mother, think, "Oh, that was fine for me to do in the '80s, but not you."
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. That's the hard part as being a parent, but at the same time, I'm so proud of them.
If there's someone who's watching, who's interested in getting involved in their local community through some sort of nonviolent protest, how would you encourage them?
Yeah. I would say just pay attention to what's going on in our community. I think with all the recent changes into our USAID and some of our federal workers being let go, there's a lot of confusion and concern. And I know there are some people even in Tampa, like standing in front of the courthouse just to say, I'm concerned about what's going on here. I want my voice to be heard. So to maybe join something like that. I think letter writing is a great way, and making phone calls to our representatives. It can be about education or climate change or homelessness, and there's so many things. For us here in this community, I think to be involved with the HOPE, Hillsborough Organization for Progress and Equality, we're going to do an action, participate with the Nehemiah action in April. I believe it's April 8th.
Okay.
And so that would be a great thing, just to be in community with our neighbors who are trying to say things can be better. And it's a nonviolent, peaceful way to do that.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Sally. As we wrap up, one thought that's been running through my head is a quote by Martin Luther King, or maybe it's by Coretta Scott King, that nonviolence is a spiritual discipline. Just like we think about reading our Bibles, praying, approaching things with compassion and curiosity, nonviolence is something that we have to practice. It doesn't come naturally. We have to embed ourselves in ways of practicing that and building that muscle. So thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Beyond the Sermon. I'm Matt Hotho.
I'm Sally Campbell-Evans.
And we'll see you next time.